we physically extracted the firmware image from the Dahua camera, put it into our Centrifuge platform, and in about 30 minutes, we saw some suspicious function calls, spawning shell accounts with some hard-coded passwords. So as we started to delve into it, we realized that the back door that we had discovered was not accidental.
Today on Technado, we're talking with Terry Dunlap from Refirm Labs. We're also going to talk about some Huawei stories, Asus, and a Lithuanian hacker. That's all coming up on Technado, starting right now. Hello and welcome to Technado. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, back from, as Don pointed out last week, a trip in Las Vegas. So just, full of cash.
Now
and
you're tired
ready
and
to
broke.
party. Yeah, it's 4 a.m. my time. I don't know what time it is here. But I am back in Don's office with Mr. Don Pizzette. And also we have over here Mr. Mike Rodrick. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you
Good
for
to see you back. Glad you're alive.
Yeah, thanks for bringing the world's largest laptop to Technado, because desk space isn't at a premium here.
That's right.
So it's good to have all of you. I see you've got the external mouse on there as well. That
Absolutely, just in case.
Doing a lot of word processing and power computing there, so that's good.
My
to have
old
you.
eyes, this big screen really helps.
Sure, yeah, he's got it zoomed in all the way. For those that can't see, the resolution is 70 by 80.
Yeah.
So nice work. All right, well, we've got a lot of stories to get to this week. The first one is a really exciting announcement, actually, from right here at ITProTV. You're probably watching this. It's probably April by the time you're seeing this, and that's when the certification goes live on April 1st. We have the new certification, the Certified Reboot Administrative Professional, that is launched. And Don, I know you were involved with this, so what's that cert all about?
Well, what we did is we took our staff. We have 12 full-time edutainers on staff at ITProTV, and we've all been doing technical training for decades now. We have well over 100 years of experience between all of us. And basically we set everybody down and we said, what are the skills that are the most critical for system admins and people that are running IT support? What is most critical for them to be successful in that role? And we boiled it all down to a handful of skills that kind of need to be in that default toolbox. And we created a certification around it. And that's where the Certified Reboot Administrative Professional came from.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look real quick. We have a little brief video about it that kind of walks you through how the cert works. So let's take a look at that real quick.
One of the things we're most proud of here at ITProTV is how quickly we can bring new certification training to market. That's why I am so excited to announce the addition of the newest course to our library, the Certified Reboot Administrator Professional. Anyone who's worked in IT knows that a reboot fixes the vast majority of help desk issues. But do you know how to properly reboot a machine? This training will prepare you to do just that.
So today we're going to be taking a look at how to reboot a Windows 10 machine. We have Ms. Vaughn Smith. So what is the first thing we need to do, Vaughn?
Well, why don't we go ahead and take a look at my screen here and I will show you. You go to the Start menu, you click it, the button right here for power, and you restart. And there you go.
And it's not just Windows. We know you need to be ready to reboot a variety of machines, and our training has you covered. From Macs and Linux to even routers and printers, the CRAP certification gives you the confidence to restart any machine in your office. And it's all presented by some of the hottest CRAP instructors in the industry. So check out our full range of CRAP courses, launching April 1st.
All right, very cool. Well, it looks like if you're trying to pass CRAP, that is the best way to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to study. You just got to try harder, and you'll push on through.
Yeah, and are you CRAP certified now?
I just got my certification the other day, and it took a little bit of studying. I was familiar with a PC, but Linux was completely new to me, and rebooting that Linux machine was a skill I had to pick up.
Yeah. Talk about routers, cell phones. There's a lot of different ways to reboot things, but once you're certified there, you're probably qualified for 95% of IT jobs.
Sky's the limits.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, great. In a completely unrelated story, now heading over to Slashdot, Microsoft memo bans April Fool's Day pranks. I I think they might have gotten upset when a lot of people use Clippy stuff. I think it was last year or the year before.
And they made them yank it.
And a little cease and desist because don't get me wrong, that's coming back. They're holding on to that patent because Clippy is going to make a comeback. We're hoping in the next version, but it's kind of sad.
It really is, and he's so much better than Cortana. I mean, he's got eyes, right? He can emote. Unlike Cortana, the circle that's just kind of there.
Well, I picked this article for today's show because it was on Slashdot, and if you're a long-term Slashdot reader, you'll know every year on April 1st, all they post are fake news stories all day long. And I used to get annoyed when I worked in an insurance company, and you get bored, you read the news, and on April Fools, you just couldn't even go to Slashdot. It was all fake. So, they're posting, and I'm sure if we check back, they'll have all fake news on the 1st.
Well, there'll be some in the government that argue that that's all that happens every day on every website.
Like CNN, isn't that that April Fool's site?
Yeah, this is the one day a year that it is real news. So that's disappointing, but I'm sure that we'll have a lot of different companies doing some fun April Fool stuff. So we'll maybe next week we'll do a little mash up and look back at some of the things that got us, but that's exciting. So Microsoft is banning the April Fool's pranks, but this story from Microsoft's own blog is real. Then DART, the Microsoft cybersecurity team we hope you never meet. It's the Microsoft Detection and Response Team. So it sounds like if they're coming to your house or your place of business, that things have hit the fan.
I love that Microsoft reuses acronyms, right? Yeah. So, like, Mike, if I say, "Hey, Mike, what is Microsoft DART?" What would you say?
I was just trying to think. I know I've heard that acronym before. It was the
Diagnostic and Repair Toolkit. There used to be a special CD they'd give just to enterprise customers because screw you, regular people. and you could interpret memory dumps and do all this great stuff. Well, now it's their detection and response team. These are the people that are getting out and being proactive. We didn't put it on the show, but just this morning there was an article out where Microsoft seized control of 99 domains that were being used by scam and ransomware attacks. And it's this team that's doing the research, putting together all the findings, working with the government and the authorities to be able to go out, and even Interpol, like internationally, to be able to go out and shut some of these things down. These are really considered some of the elite security professionals that are out there.
That's very cool. That'd be a fun team to be a part of, but like I said, not the one that you want to see heading to your office one day.
Did they show up with the bulletproof vests and their acronym across the front and the automatic rifles?
That would be really cool.
They're virtual bulletproof vests.
They all have a laptop in a holster on their
hip. Ready to go at any moment.
Quick draw.
All right, well, they may be responding to their own office soon because we have this article from ZDNet. Windows 10 devices open to full compromise from Huawei PC drivers. So what does this mean? This is Huawei machines that are running Windows 10 could have issues?
So in this particular scenario, yes, but let's generalize this a little bit more. With Windows, back in the 32-bit days, I guess they still make 32-bit Windows, don't they? Yeah. So with 32-bit Windows, the drivers were not digitally signed originally. And so anybody could modify a driver to do whatever the hell they wanted. And when you power on a Windows machine, it loads those drivers, and it loads them originally in kernel space before they moved into user space. But even in user space, it's still running with administrative privileges. So if there's malware, a malicious payload inside a driver, it basically has full access to your system. Well, digitally signed drivers were supposed to solve that if somebody tampers with the driver, it won't work in Windows, and 64-bit Windows has always required that since it launched. So that's supposed to be solved. Unfortunately, it looks like some malicious Huawei drivers or drivers that has some kind of exploitable fault in them have been released, and they're digitally signed. So if you install them, they pass all the security checks, they're in there, and then if somebody takes advantage of the exploit in that driver, they would then have full elevated privileges across the entire machine. It's a remote access attack, so they would still have to have access to your machine one way or another, via the network. But once they had that access, once they could reach your machine, they would then be able to do pretty much whatever they wanted.
It is not the best time to work at Huawei, it doesn't seem like. I haven't seen a great human interest story come out of Huawei.
Oddly enough, that was one of the first things that crossed my mind when I read the article, like, wait a minute. This is a pretty glaring thing. This can happen to any company, right? Sure. Anybody who makes a driver. but they're singling out Huawei. This could be part of a, not necessarily a conspiracy, but a concerted effort to...
Like a PR attack almost.
Yeah, because there's all that stuff going on in Germany right now where the U.S. is trying to get Germany to stop using Huawei phones. I wouldn't be surprised if this was part of that big push.
Interesting. Well, is that the same thing that is now happening in our next story? Over on The Verge, this article, ASUS software updates were used to spread malware, security group says. So is this the same kind of thing or different?
This is similar in that drivers could be used as part of it, but not a guarantee, right? So what happened here with ASUS is their software update server and the software update process was compromised. So they don't even need to push a malicious driver at this point because your software update's already run with admin privileges. And so they can modify any, or attackers, let's set this in the right frame, right? Attackers figured out how weak the security was configured on ASUS's update servers, and they compromised it and modified some updates that were a part of that server, targeting some very specific customers. Apparently it was targeting 600 individuals. But they modified the updates, and it applied to tons and tons of people. Now, initially, the news that came out somewhere in here, Kaspersky Labs detected this.
Which I like to call the Huawei of security firms.
Yeah. So they came out and they reported that as many as 100,000 customers were affected by this. ASUS came out a little bit later and said they fixed it, they closed the flaw, and they've reached out to contact the 600 targeted people to get them. I mean, it was very specific. These 600 individual machines that were being targeted. So they reached out to them. Well, ASUS did a follow-up. We've got that from Tom's Hardware right here. ASUS reacts to live update utility hack. And what they're saying is, yes, there was a vulnerability, but it didn't affect hundreds of thousands of people. It really just affected a couple of people, and it's not a big deal. But Kaspersky Labs individually detected about 53,000 or 57,000, and Symantec had detected 13,000. And so assuming people aren't running multiple antivirus at the same time, that means that at least 70,000 people were affected by this, and I think it was probably a lot more. But it goes to show how important your supply chain is, that we pull in updates from a number of vendors, and if you can't trust those updates, you've now got a pretty big weakness in your system.
Yeah, a big problem.
That is no good. All right. Well,
good contribution, guys.
Yeah,
glad to have you both.
I understood a lot of the words that Don said in those last two things, and I kind of tuned out because I don't use Huawei phones. I don't have Kaspersky running on any of this.
So this is ASUS, right?
I don't.
And
it's a Mac.
I just built a new computer at home, which has largely ASUS components in it. I have ASUS motherboard, ASUS video card, and so I run the ASUS update software, and I absolutely uninstalled it.
Have you been contacted as one of the 600
I have
people?
not, but I can't imagine I'm on anybody's radar for being targeted.
They're getting down to you soon. All right, well, we're going to talk more about Don's new home-built computer in a moment, but first we want to talk about one of those feel-good stories over at Naked Security from Sophos. A sacked IT guy annihilates 23 of his ex-employer's AWS servers, which... I'm sure we've all thought about on those times that we've been sacked. But this guy, he's going to jail, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is over in the UK, and this has happened a few times. I know we've reported on it in the past. An employee, there was an employee who quit Twitter, and when he quit, his last act was to delete Donald Trump's account. These kind of things happen. It's super easy to trace these things. The people almost always go to jail. But what I thought was interesting was that these were cloud servers, right? So it was AWS resources or EC2 instances. He just went in and terminated 23 of them. When you terminate an instance, Amazon doesn't give you a way to unterminate it, right? But if you have snapshots built, or if you've built custom AMIs for these things, reprovisioning them should just take seconds. It should be an easy fix. But this really highlights how companies don't plan on a authorized user with full access credentials doing damage. They always plan on the malicious attack, not necessarily the insider.
And that's really crazy to think about because I think the majority of the attacks do come from the inside, and they're the ones that do the most damage.
Yeah. And if they don't have some kind of recovery plan in place, or if this guy who got fired was the person who was supposed to do the recovery, then they're really screwed. So it shows how you've got to cross-train people, you've got to have more than one set of eyes on things, and you've got to plan for machines getting wiped out like this. One thing they could have done is AWS has termination protection on their VMs, on their instances. And with termination protection, you can use IAM to approve people to be able to disable that or prevent them. So you can have this user with full admin access, but not permission to disable termination protection. They wouldn't be able to terminate instances. So, I mean, odds are he would have just found some other malicious thing to do, and I can't terminate them, but I'll shut them down. That'll show them. It would still be a problem. But you got to plan for insider attacks.
Well, my big question is, can you still claim unemployment from prison?
I think so, right?
I don't know.
I don't know the paper.
But that'd be nice if you're making money and you got free room and board for a year. It's a really great way while you're looking for your next position.
Build a nest egg.
Yeah, if they let you also continue to study with a service like ITProTV from prison, you're going to come out with certs, refreshed.
I wonder how many of our subscribers are in prison. Can we find that out?
I don't know. If you are in prison, if you could reach out to us.
Tweet to us.
Yeah, tweet us over at ITProTV and let us know what you're in for and what you're studying.
Yeah.
That'd be great to hear.
And if you're available for an interview with a contraband cell phone, that's even better.
Oh my gosh, that'd be great.
That would be like the best interview ever.
Are you talking to us from the yard, or are you in the showers? That's great. All right, this was actually good news for once here in this show, which has been a very depressing show so far. Over on the Chicago Tribune, the fastest computer in the world is being built 25 miles outside of Chicago, and it's codenamed, or I don't know if it's codenamed or if it's just named Aurora, does that just mean it's in Aurora, Illinois, which is the home of who?
Oh, Wayne's World.
Wayne and Garth.
There we go.
Yeah, right there from the public access channels. So this looks to be an very impressive supercomputer from these photos here.
You were talking about positive articles. This is the first positive article I've seen about Chicago this year. Yeah. It's been a rough year for Chicago, but they do have a new massive computer. There is a constant battle going on for who has the biggest supercomputer.
This is one of those things that'll be different next month or next year. Somebody else will take that title, but they get to hold it for a little while at least.
Yep, and it's been in China for a while now. I think like the last two of the world's largest supercomputers have been over in China, but this is the latest one. And do they actually have any good pictures? It's like, here's some black racks.
Yeah, exciting.
There we go, black racks. Point being, all of these systems will be linked together, either in a massive cluster or in distributed nodes that are then breaking up a workload and processing it all simultaneously. The number one challenge with building a data center like this is temperature. They generate so much heat in such a small space.
You just open the doors in Chicago.
You probably could.
Certain times a year, for sure.
Yeah.
Microsoft was researching that, putting a data center underwater. Yeah, so
that was really cool.
Yeah. But the big deal here, though, is just the sheer amount of power they create. They almost always have to custom build a building for it. They can't just say, "Oh, here's this old building. I'll stick a data center in there."
They did that with the church, though, over in Barcelona.
They did. And it was in the top 30.
It was in there. Yeah, it was up there.
It was impressive.
That was very cool. I'm just saw a follow up though that the crypts have now taken over the fastest computers. So,
well, the data center is big enough that there's some blood territory and crypt territory, and
there are. You just have to walk around. You don't want to walk through wearing red.
And definitely not when they're dance fighting. No. we all saw the bad video.
It's like West Side Story. All right. Speaking of Don's computer that he is building. We've got a story about a shortage of chips here on Tom's Hardware. Compal using AMD CPUs more amid Intel shortage. So were you able to secure one of these chips?
I was. And it's funny. We've been passing on. I don't think we've reported on the CPU shortage yet, but for about 6 months now, people have been talking about how there's this Intel CPU shortage. And it actually made it into Intel's earnings reports, either last week or that are coming out this week, I can't remember when, that they're having to tell people, like, look, we have a shortage in CPUs right now, so we can't keep up with the demand, which means our revenues can't go up, and so that's going to be a problem. I kind of blew it off because we've bought a number of laptops this year. We haven't had a problem getting anything. But I decided to build out my own computer at home, which meant I needed to buy a CPU individually, not an entire computer, just the CPU. And sure enough, if you go on just go on Amazon and look for Intel i5s, i7s, and i9s, and they're all out of stock. At least the ones from reputable vendors. i3s were still available in ready supply because who the hell wants one of those?
Yeah.
but I wanted an i9 because I was going to treat myself and buy a processor that's horribly overspec'd for my needs. And I ended up having to shop around a couple of different places before I found somebody that had one in stock. So it's really kind of an interesting thing. And Peter and I were discussing this earlier that we're trying to figure out why is there this processor shortage, right? Because Intel's been manufacturing processors for decades now. You'd think they'd have this under control, but now there's this shortage. There's certainly increased demand. People are buying devices faster than others. But my working theory on this, and Peter, you can back this up for me, right? That this is marketing's fault.
Yeah, and that's rare for me to say, but it seems to be an issue not with the device itself, because AMD is able to continue working there, but the problem is just with Intel, and it seems to be a packaging issue based on that.
So every processor I've always bought came in a cheap cardboard box, and it didn't matter if the processor cost $600; it was still a cheap box. I ordered this i9, had no idea it was going to come in this crazy plastic cube. What is this?
Hexasphere.
Dodecahedron? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a Dungeons and Dragons die.
Oh, there we go. It's a 20-sided die. Yep. So it might be. I don't know. And anyhow, it's crazy packaging, which is really impressive. Like, kudos to the marketing team for coming up with this crazy thing. But, that certainly adds to the production cost of these things.
And when you open it, was it like dry ice and the smoke came out?
That would have been cool.
Yeah.
LEDs? It didn't have that.
LEDs.
So,
yeah. So the marketing team took a swing. I think they hit it maybe a triple, but not a home run. Dry ice. And
I was
LEDs.
impressed as a customer, though. It was a neat box.
It's a great experience, and that's going to go up on the wall, we think, in the shelf.
Yeah, I'll find a spot on the shelf for it somewhere.
Yeah,
I can't. Normally, I would just throw the box away, but this is so fancy. I
Not
feel like
that
I can't.
Yeah, you need to get a little Windex first, and you got fingerprints all over that thing. But we'll get
That's why we can't have nice things.
i9 up on the wall. Well, I thought this next story was fun. Not for Michael Cohen, but for those of us interested in how all this stuff works. I was first introduced to like the Wi-Fi pineapple through the Silicon Valley show, which is hilarious, and then I've learned a lot more about that kind of stuff from attending RSA for a few years and B-Sides and things like that. But so this one kind of caught my attention over on CBS News. Michael Cohen investigation involves secretive triggerfish tracking device. So, Don, you were explaining this to me a little bit. This is kind of like a Wi-Fi pineapple, but for cell towers.
Sure. So the interesting thing here is that they call it a triggerfish because it's what most of us know as a stingray.
Right.
And it's the like worst kept secret in the national security space that the NSA had this developed, but FBI uses it, CIA uses it. It's all over the place. Basically, it's about the size of a briefcase, and it is basically a fake cell phone tower. Mm-hmm. So it broadcasts out a short-range signal that looks like a cell tower. And every cell phone in the vicinity will connect to the stingray instead of the real tower, and then the stingray forwards it onto the real tower. So you make calls and stuff just like normal. Meanwhile, the government is able to intercept every single communication that you're making, as well as track your location because cell phones give off location data. So with Michael Cohen, he was saying a lot of different stuff. Over the last year, this man has had so many different stories and things, and half of his testimony was done in secret, so we didn't even know what he said. Hard to figure out what's true and what's false. So the government was actually tracking his location and validating the information he was giving using one of these stingrays, which now apparently has more than one code name. So when you see triggerfish or whatever, and it just shows that, like with Wi-Fi networks, you can't trust that a Wi-Fi network actually is what it says it is. You've got to have some kind of way to validate that, and cell phones do not have a good way to validate that information.
No, they don't. And the thing I think about is all the other people in the area. They might have been tracking Michael Cohen, but what about the other guests of the hotel?
Yeah, there's no way to segment out that.
No, any device in range is going to connect to that stingray and is going to potentially be monitored, data captured.
So it's kind of like by carrier. So like if they know, okay, his stuff's on Verizon, this is going to simulate that tower. So anyone else that's looking for that same tower is going to go through that.
Well, the Stingray can actually do multiple technologies. Okay. So, it can grab Sprint and Verizon and AT&T all in the same box. It's an impressive set. It's really sophisticated technology. And then we rely on the honor system where they say, well, we delete the records that we didn't have a warrant for, right?
Yeah.
So
unless we hear something really good.
Yeah.
It's like, we're gonna search 10 houses, but we'll only take evidence from the one we have a warrant on. That's what happens here. These things have been under a lot of review. Like, people have been complaining about them a lot.
Yeah.
Violation of privacy. Edward Snowden had information on them in his leak.
Was that the first it kind of came out that, yes, this actually exists?
Yeah, there were actually hints of it. What was the earlier one that Julian Assange pushed out? Or maybe I'm mixing them up. Maybe it did come from his, because then there was the other one from Bradley Manning, where he had some information on it as well. But yeah, maybe it did originate from Snowden.
Yeah.
But either way, once the information was out there, the government denies they exist. There's no official commentary. So now we're starting to see these other names used to try and avoid confirming they exist. But it's worst kept secret.
And it says on here, so you were saying you can actually listen in, but it says on here they were using it simply as a tracking.
Because they were just
tool,
grabbing
but-
location data.
Yeah,
course, that's
which
all they were
is
doing.
interesting. So.
Throwing away the voice stuff.
Of course.
Yeah, why would we need that? And we actually have more on this story over at CNN Politics, CNN.com. Michael Cohen warrants show how the FBI can unlock your phone and track your movements. I know we've talked a lot about this, about, with these biometric, authentication tools now. Are they able to get into your phone? And obviously, there was a big stuff back with the San Bernardino shootings. Of, can we get into these phones? But they're able to actually get warrants now to require you to unlock these things.
Yeah, the Stingray is a very sophisticated attack, right? Like, they build the special hardware to emulate the cell towers. That's a lot of work. I could not do that, right? But they had all of Michael Cohen's information versus San Bernardino, where Apple went to court. It went to the I guess they canceled right before going to the Supreme Court on that one. So obviously Apple doesn't want to share that
didn't need
data
it anymore.
But Michael Cohen, they got the data. So how did they do that? If Apple wouldn't turn it over and Michael Cohen wouldn't turn it over? Well, what happened here is very low tech, and that is the judge issued a warrant, or approved a warrant, to allow them to hold Michael Cohen's phone in front of his face for Face ID and hold his finger. It said any of his fingers, including thumbs, because apparently they have to designate that separate in the warrant.
Those aren't fingers?
So that I guess not.
Can you set it up with your toe?
They were probably just trying to make sure that it wouldn't get thrown out in court a year from now, like when he appeals. Well, they used my thumb. It's not in the warrant.
That's why I only use my big toe for
my toe as soon as we
all my
leave.
things. Why is
that
Peter's
work?
foot up? I don't see why it wouldn't. It's got a print.
Print on it. Yeah.
Your toe does have a print?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm going to try this. I've got the fingerprint thing set up here.
Oh, on your laptop?
Yeah. Should I do that while you guys are talking? Go
I
ahead.
guess I've
Keep going.
never looked at my toe enough to know that it has a print. But, so this was super low tech, but it highlights one of the weaknesses, because Apple is telling us a Face ID is more secure than fingerprint, which is crap. And then they tell us that fingerprint is perfectly secure, but in both of these cases, a PIN number would be more secure, because the warrant can't force you to disclose information that would incriminate yourself, so you can just plead the fifth and not give you your code. But apparently your fingerprint and your face, on the other hand, are not protected. You don't have the same legal protections on that. So low-tech hack, and, in this case, did not work in his favor.
Yeah, and I wonder if, obviously these are legal questions, but I wonder if they can, lift a print off a glass and then, almost build a prosthetic and say, hey, we can do it this way if we don't get a warrant, because you don't have a right to privacy from this. And I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Or
kind of depends, I think, on some of the devices that look for heat signatures or proof of life type thing versus some of the cheaper ones that do not.
Yeah, like if they can just print out a picture of his
picture,
face
hold
and
it up,
lay it over their head, Hannibal Lecter style, and see if they can get that to work.
Yeah, I mean, they could just cut his face off.
Yeah.
And
You need a warrant for
I'm
that?
surprised, though. You would think the lawyers would say, look, by giving you my finger, I'm basically doing the same thing as giving you my PIN. Be interesting to see how that holds up.
yeah, I wonder if maybe the exception is the fact, like your face, everybody can see your face. So it's not a secret. It's not a hidden thing. It's not private. So, there's that. On the fingerprint side, he worked for the government, so his fingerprints were probably on file. So maybe they view that as he already
Gave them up or...
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. But I know they're allowed to take a cup with saliva on it for DNA. That's allowed because you've effectively discarded the cup, which makes it no longer private. But your fingerprint is still attached to your body. So that's a whole different story.
Got all this legal
we'll see.
advice from the law offices of Van Razam, Rodrick, and Bazette for all your cybersecurity needs. We've got you covered. All right, this guy could use our help. A Lithuanian man stole $122 million from Facebook and Google. This is on Tom's Hardware again. A modern-day Robin Hood. So, Don, you were saying this was an interesting... And you used air quotes when you said hack.
Yeah.
So I want to know, how did this guy do this?
So, every now and then you hear about one of these crazy attacks, and it turns out to be something low tech, right? Like the FBI getting into the Apple phone there, which turned out to be something anybody could hold a phone up to Michael Cohen's face. Well, in our WTF article of the week here, we've got this Lithuanian man who stole $122 million, not from some little company or some mom and pop with no security, but from Facebook and Google, two companies who probably have the best security in the industry. And how did he pull off this amazing hack? Did he compromise private keys, break into servers? Did he hang from the ceiling like Tom Cruise?
Yeah. He's probably crap certified.
Yeah, he probably is crap certified. Because what he did is he sent him an invoice. He sent him an invoice, wrote up a bill and sent it to him and said, hey, I did some work for you. You owe me $20,000. You owe me $60,000, $100,000. And each time he would send in a bill, guess what the companies did?
Pay that bill.
They paid the bill because good companies pay their bills.
Your credit's important. The last thing you want is bad credit.
So $122 million. I forget the time frame. It's over a 2-year period.
Now, why is this calling him a Robin Hood, though? Was he giving this to the poor?
Yeah, did he give it away when he stole it?
Apparently some of it he was, throughout his community. Okay. But at the end of the day, he is just robbing the coffers of a company, and that was it. Most of the money he did keep for himself. It was not like Robin Hood. Apparently, modern day Robin Hood sucks. So, but that was a penny. Yeah. But I just thought it was really interesting because companies will invest millions of dollars in hiring the top security professionals, which is why you should get an IT career in security. Certification available on ITProTV. Shameless plug. And they also spend money on firewalls and intrusion detection, intrusion prevention devices, all sorts of things. They dump all this money into it, but then they don't secure simple things like which bills do we pay, and out goes the money.
And that's interesting because I know, like my old company worked a lot with Microsoft, and there was a whole vendor approval system. You had to have a vendor ID number and all these things. I know that if there were certain one-off deals that they could approve for less than X amount. So I wonder if he just flooded with smaller bills that a company like Google or Facebook isn't going to bat an eye at a $2,000 bill coming in or a $3,000, $5,000 bill coming in. The $1 million one probably needs a couple signatures. But that's pretty impressive. And he agreed to return nearly $50 million.
Yep, which means the rest is...
And he used a company name that actually exists, so I wonder also if Facebook and Google maybe already did business with this company?
Oh, so they were in the system potentially.
Right. Yeah. It was a Quanta Computer, which I'm not familiar with, and Quanta is based out of Taiwan. He opened up a Quanta Computer in Latvia.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, because you could probably get the proper business names and things if they were not doing business there, and then... looks like the arm of that company. Well, that's fun. I got to try that. Because now I know that you can get unemployment while I'm...
maybe you can do the jail shower interview.
I'm going to need you to fire me right before, and I'm going to, hide a Huawei phone somewhere, and I'll be all set to go. You'll be able to track me as well. I'm bringing all the stories together now. They're all tied together. All right, well, we actually have an interview that's going to be pretty interesting. It's someone we talked to actually with Daniel Lowry back in 2018 when we went to RSA. We talked to Terry Dunlap of Refirm Labs. Have you heard of them before?
I hadn't, but I did some research before the interview, and it's pretty slick stuff. You'll want to learn about it.
All right, well, then let's kick Mike out, and let's go ahead and bring in Terry all the way from Maryland. We're going to do that right after this. Right here on Technado. All right, hello and welcome back to Technado. And as promised, we have an interview right now with Terry Dunlap, who is the co-founder of Refirm Labs up in Maryland. Terry, how you doing?
I'm doing excellent and getting better. How about yourself?
We're doing pretty good here. Thanks for joining us. So for those who are not familiar, I know I think I saw you guys at RSA and know a little bit about you, but why don't you tell the people about Refirm Labs and what you guys are all about?
Sure. Refirm Labs specializes in vetting, validating, and monitoring firmware. So for all those people that don't know what firmware is, it's basically the underlying operating system that's running all these IoT devices that are running wild out there. So what we attempt to do is look for insecure practices in firmware before it actually goes out into the field. And once it is deployed, we will continuously monitor that firmware for any security problems that might come down the pike in the future.
So, as the co-founder, someone that helped create this company, what did you see as the need, or kind of what drove you to where you are now?
Actually, it's an interesting story because we never really had intentions on releasing this platform publicly. I spent some years at the National Security Agency doing offensive cyber operations, going after high-value terrorist targets and foreign governments, and we focused on embedded devices before IoT was even a thing. So we got very good at looking for vulnerabilities and then weaponizing vulnerabilities. After my NSA stint, I started my first company, which is a government contracting company still around today called Tactical Network Solutions, doing offensive cyber operations. And it was during the 10-year span of running Tactical Network Solutions where we started to incrementally develop an automated system to rapidly reverse engineer firmware images. So we could actually spend less time going through firmware images in a trial and error basis, trying to find something that could be exploited and weaponized for our customers. So we happened to be at a conference in 2017 where we actually demonstrated this to other government contractors and the intelligence community, and we were approached by some investors locally here in the community, and basically we sat down with them and mapped out the opportunities that exist in this space to actually spin this product out of my government contracting company, create Refirm Labs, and offer this as a commercial solution to defend against people like ourselves.
So that sounds pretty amazing. And you mentioned rapidly reverse engineering the firmware. So in theory, you could take anybody's firmware and start working on it. But now that you've kind of gained a little steam, the company's grown a bit, is anybody sharing with you like the firmware source code where you don't have to reverse engineer, you can just go into it, or is it all tied to reverse engineering?
Nope. It's all taking a compiled firmware image and doing the disassembly on it, and then analyzing first statically all the binaries, looking for the low-hanging fruit, buffer overflows, command injections, things like that, and then piping them through a proprietary dynamic emulation engine where we attempt to modify the input variables that either a user would control or that would be received from network traffic. And then if we can find a crash, then we flag that particular binary and that function call as highly critical, because that's as state-sponsored hackers, that's what we would look at to try and weaponize them.
So you were telling me before we got started off the air about the Centrifuge Platform. Is that what you were just describing there? And
yes.
Can you kind of walk us through
sorry
that?
About that. Yeah,
no
so we took the technology and called it the centrifuge because we're basically ripping it apart like a centrifuge, all the components of the firmware, analyzing those, and then presenting that to the end user in a comprehensive dashboard.
So you were telling me about you have kind of quarterly reports then that you put out to your customers, and walk me through that process and what are they getting and how does that work?
Actually, it's not quarterly reports that we put out. It's not like we have a threat intel product. So it's a subscription platform that resides in the cloud, like everything today, that's our customers subscribe to. And right now we gain a lot of traction in the telco space. So we have customers like AT&T, Charter Communications, and others who are actually outsourcing the development of their home gateway routers, Wi-Fi routers, set-top boxes. And so what they're doing is using this platform to vet and validate the firmware that's being developed for these devices before they even accept them into their system. So that way they can be assured that they're deploying the most secure devices into customer homes and into their own internal networks without any fear of having, Chinese implants, backdoors, things of that nature.
So I think I misunderstood because my original thought was that, somebody would come to you and subscribe and you were just choosing what firmware to review and then we'd benefit from that. But it sounds like if we engaged with you that we could actually submit firmware to you, so we kind of influence which ones are being reviewed. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so none of our findings are public. So if you become a subscriber, you have your own account. So if you're, ABC company, you're going to have your own ABC company account. You can tell us how many of your team members should have access to that repository. And then as you want to evaluate firmware, you can simply upload it to our platform, and then only you and your team get to see the reports of that firmware. So in addition to the potential 0 days, we look, of course, for known vulnerabilities. We look for backdoor accounts, hard-coded usernames, passwords. We extract all the crypto material, make sure manufacturers don't leave their private signing keys in there, anything like that.
So I'm thinking like Cisco routers, right? Cisco has had a great track record. I think it's 5 backdoor accounts now in 5 years. And various researchers find them, and they're like, well, all right, here's a hard-coded credential again, and they get it out of there. So if I wanted to submit the firmware that I'm running on my Cisco router right now to you, you guys could review it and look for that. If other customers are submitting the same firmware, does that map together? You just share the same report with them, or does that not happen very often? Is everybody running firmware that's different?
So far, everybody seems to be submitting different firmware. So from a computational point of view, if 2 identical firmwares are submitted, we would run each one independently of the other. So if you submit a Cisco firmware and then somebody else submits one a month later and it happens to be the exact same one, we will rerun that analysis, because we're always updating our internal analyzers, looking for things that our own researchers might discover, and incorporating what the public finds in terms of CVEs. So you could submit it today and then come back maybe 5 weeks from today and find brand new vulnerabilities that weren't there from the initial scan, because we're tapping into the CVE database, and if something popped between now and 5 weeks from now, we'll automatically rescan that for our customers. So when they log in, they'll see it. Plus, they'll get an email if we find something that hits that was just released.
That's very cool. And I'm thinking about our network here, even at home, really, that we have so many different devices on the network. And I'm thinking about the platforms. So originally, when you mentioned reverse engineering earlier, I was thinking, all right, well, if you have x86 binaries, that's one thing, or ARM binaries, that's a different one, and different firmware for different architecture. But if you're dealing with IoT devices, the architectures are all over the place. There's tons of proprietary things. So how do you guys overcome that? Is it all just 100% tied to the CVEs, or are you having to create a different scan for each type of architecture that you're having to approach?
Right now, we have developed a platform to target the 2 largest, market share dominant players out there, and that's Linux and QNX. So on the Linux side, we're able to actually look at MIPS, ARM, x86, 64, and Super H. So as long as it's been compiled for one of those architectures, we have the capability today to actually decompile that and do the analysis. Now, an area where we're starting to see a lot of demand, and it makes sense, is in the industrial space with real-time operating systems. So hopefully we will be, in short time, providing capabilities to reverse engineer things like FreeRTOS, ThreadX, and VxWorks.
So have you guys been doing work on cell phones yet? That's, I know, a growing area of concern, that a lot of networks like ours, where we allow guests to come in and join our wireless network, and if there's a compromised firmware there, it's on our network. So have you seen a lot of action there?
Yeah, we've had a lot of requests for looking at cellular devices, baseband firmware, things of that nature. That's not our specialty yet. I mean, when we were developing this capability, the demands from the intelligence community and the military were primarily devices that were running Linux. So that's where we developed our expertise over the past decade or so, and that's where we continue to focus. And we've even spoken to some customers like Honeywell, who said that we already cover the fact that we cover Linux. We already handle probably close to 65% of products that are produced by Honeywell. And if we were to actually go down the road and start supporting something like VxWorks or ThreadX, then we'll have the capability to actually cover upwards of 90% of Honeywell products.
I know I'm pretty sure I can say this confidently, that every webcam I've ever touched has always run a Linux-based operating system.
Yeah.
And I know my thermostats at home do. That's the easy way for IoT to develop without having to pay a license fee for an underlying OS. You mentioned FreeRTOS, or actually you mentioned QNX earlier, QNX.
QNX, yeah.
And that one's commercial, but where are you seeing that being used?
Infotainment systems in automotive.
Oh, like head units?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so all your nav systems, everything that, when you plug in your iPhone, you got either Android or Apple CarPlay. All those infotainment systems are running primarily QNX.
Excellent. Oh, I guess maybe not excellent. It depends on what they've got going on in there. So far from your findings, like what you mentioned, you found hard-coded credentials or backdoor accounts. What would you say is the most like grievous offense you found inside of one of these firmware so far?
This is an honest-to-God true story. I wish I could say the name, but we're under NDA. But we were contacted by a Fortune 500 company, a very large entertainment company, who had Dahua manufactured security cameras on some of their properties. Now, for those of you that don't know, Dahua is China's #2 surveillance camera manufacturer. The #1 manufacturer is Hikvision, which, according to the Wall Street Journal, is 42% owned by the Chinese government. So we just made the assumption that if #1 is owned by the Chinese government, the government's probably involved with #2 and probably #3 as well. So this particular company had some concerns about the cameras, and so they asked us to take a look at the Dahua cameras that are deployed. So we actually ordered this particular make and model of the camera. We physically extracted the firmware image from the Dahua camera, put it into our Centrifuge platform, and in about 30 minutes, we saw some suspicious function calls, spawning shell accounts with some hard-coded passwords. So as we started to delve into it, we realized that the back door that we had discovered was not accidental. Now, most of the time when we look at IoT firmware, we do find engineering test accounts that have been left in by accident. They haven't been malicious. But the way that this was obfuscated made it clear that this was intentional. So we took the results, we notified the Fortune 500 company customer, and within about 36 hours, he actually sent me a text message with a firewall log attached. And the attachment, he said, you guys were spot on. And I looked at the attachment, and it showed traffic from this particular network being sent out through the cameras to Chinese IP addresses. So armed with that, they were able to mitigate that outflow of traffic, block off those cameras, and then in about 3 weeks' time, it took them to actually rip out the cameras and replace them with new ones. So that's an actual incident that impacted this company. And probably if shareholders had found out about this, I'm sure it would have taken a hit on the stock.
Wow. So as a reminder, we're talking with Terry Dunlap of Refirm Labs. And Terry, so I was kind of curious about what that process is when you do find something like that. I mean, obviously, it sounds like first and foremost, you update your client and let them know, here's something that's going on. But, I mean, do you report that out to the media then? Do you report that to other security firms? Do you go, in this case, it sounds like it was almost more of a front door than a back door, so the manufacturer knows about it. But, do you report these vulnerabilities back to the manufacturer? What's that process like?
Yeah, so in this particular case, we actually notified Dahua that we were going to go public with our findings, and we gave them like a couple weeks to reply that what their stance was. So we didn't hear anything. So we contacted our friends at the Washington Post and Fortune, and they actually ran with the story. And of course, we got contacted by Dahua after that. So Dahua said, "Oh, we looked at the wrong firmware image. We're going to send you the latest firmware image that's been removed." And it's like, okay, so we'll give it a shot, and we'll see what this new one shows. So we ran it through our platform, and sure enough, he was right. The backdoor or the account, the password was no longer where we found it. It was simply moved to a different location in a different binary in the firmware. So I reported that back to him, and I showed him all the ITPro printouts and everything that we've done even on a manual basis to prove, to step through our logic and identify exactly in the line of code where we found this, and asked him to explain it. And he couldn't. He basically said, my engineer assures me that this is not a backdoor, that it has been corrected and no longer exists. And then my last email to him was, are you sure your engineer works for you and not your government? And I never heard a reply back.
Yeah, the guy standing over my shoulder said to tell you that that's been removed, and you can't actually see that. So I actually see that you have a blog post on your website about this, and it's titled "The Congress Bans Those Cameras." So
Yes.
So this went further than from this point. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that we were responsible for Congress taking action, but that's not the case. Dahua and some of these other manufacturers, like I mentioned, Hikvision and I think ZTE and Huawei, they've all been targets of security researchers, people looking for proof that the Chinese are up to no good. Finally, Congress got their act together last year and passed, as part of the Defense Authorization Bill, a section that bans the U.S. government, military, embassies from using these cameras that are manufactured by Hikvision and Dahua. We were just another voice in the crowd, basically telling Congress that this can't stand. Somebody needs to take action, and they did.
So it's really cool to hear this side of the story, because we do hear a lot of people. Well, actually, the EU is going through this right now, where they're saying, the U.S. is overreacting, and Huawei phones are perfectly fine and safe, and we'll allow them to be used. I believe Germany was the one that was making the big push last week over it. And so, I mean, we've got documented cases here, maybe not of Huawei phones specifically, but of Chinese hardware that's got these backdoors in it. Have you found similar activity from say, U.S.-built equipment, or has it all been mostly equipment built overseas?
It's what we look at, and what our customers want us to look at are primarily things that are coming from overseas. I mean, we have looked at Cisco stuff. I mean, we have found some stuff in some of the older Cisco gear. It's usually the stuff that we find with Cisco is usually from one of their acquisitions. So some company that they acquire that may not have had the security practices and rigor and standards that Cisco proper would have. Some of those legacy devices that are now branded Cisco, we usually find problems with those. But I wouldn't say that that's Cisco's fault. That was, the company's fault that they acquired.
That's a use case scenario I hadn't thought of before, is that Cisco equipment, it'll run for darn near forever. So if you stick a Cisco router in a closet and forget about it, it'll run for 10 years. But they end of life it after 6 or 7 years, and they stop doing updates. So if we're in a situation where we have to use some legacy equipment, maybe it's some proprietary system, we've got to have it, and we're concerned about the security of that device, I guess an organization like yours would be available to say, take this firmware we're running and at least let us know what's wrong with it. That way we can put in mitigations around it.
Yeah, that's in fact what some of our customers have been able to do is, they have some end-of-life legacy equipment. They're still able to get access to the firmware. They'll run it through our platform. They'll realize what the current known vulnerabilities are and what the potential 0 days are. So then they can take proactive measures to either put that device in a VLAN, beef up their firewall rule set, or whatever. At least they're knowledgeable and they know that this could be a problem. Now they know how to defend it, and hopefully they've shored up those defenses to protect against those particular attack vectors.
So do you ever work with companies like that directly with the manufacturers that, Cisco might say, hey, we're acquiring this company and we want you to review, the firmware on these? Is that ever a use case for you guys?
Hasn't been yet, but if Cisco is out there listening and they're about to acquire somebody, we're happy to help them out.
Well, you're going to find it anyway. It sounds like they should maybe let you know before it gets to the customer. So I wanted to ask you as well. We were talking a little bit before. Don is a big. He likes to make big predictions, and I understand that you have a bone to pick with blockchain, and I would love to hear that.
I really don't have a bone to pick. I just think it's overhyped. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know that much about blockchain, but when my inbox gets filled with all these invites to all these blockchain conferences, and they're trying to use it in all these different spaces like finance and insurance, and I mean, it's just overwhelming. And I was at RSA this year, and I was arguing with a guy that point to me I asked him, point to me one use case where blockchain is actively being implemented and it's effective and it's actually having an impact. And he told me that it's in the finance sector. It's like, okay, well, I haven't seen anything. And it was ironic that today, as I was mentioning to you before we started shooting here, was that CNBC had a article out by the CEO of Wells Fargo basically claiming, hey, blockchain has not lived up to the hype. And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, whoever was behind the marketing of this did an excellent job, and I'd love to hire him for our company.
Well, there was a research paper just released last month, back in February, that was talking about a system where they were going to use blockchain to validate firmware images. And this was for not necessarily where the manufacturer was putting the backdoors in, but where maybe firmware images have been modified after the fact. And so, I mean, obviously, blockchain is going to totally solve all our firmware problems.
Well, sure. I mean, I keep telling our marketing people, I said, hey, let's start sprinkling the term blockchain through all our marketing material, and maybe we'll get more traffic and more business.
Yeah, you just do a find and replace for
Exactly.
Internet of Things or machine learning and replace it with blockchain. You guys will be all set. And so, well, it sounds like blockchain is taking away the need for Refirm Labs. So, well, thanks, Terry, for trying.
No problem.
I guess in that scenario, because you got two different scenarios, though, right? So if the manufacturer is baking the backdoor into the firmware, then it would still pass a blockchain verification, and so that's where Refirm Labs would still be needed. If it was modified after the fact, I suppose. But does that happen? Have you seen that, Terry? Like with equipment where the firmware wasn't in the original form from the original manufacturer, that obviously somebody gotten in and tampered with it.
We haven't had any customers bring that to our attention. Now, they may have discovered something, but I mean, so I can't comment on that because I don't know, but it would not surprise me where they would put in an original firmware and then maybe test it again later and find out that there's been some special sauce added to the firmware.
Let me, kind of off topic and not necessarily in line with your company, but I certainly like to get opinions on this. At the beginning of the year, or I guess it was end of last year, there was the huge story about Supermicro motherboards having a embedded IC on them that was basically tampering with the operation of the it tampered with a number of things, right? It was able to intercept and communicate, but it basically tampered with the BIOS of that system being able to interact with the hardware. And it all got called into question a month later, and everybody involved said they've never seen it before, and it's crazy. So we were all kind of left in this spot where nobody knows if that story had any real merit behind it. And so unofficially, in your opinion, like did that story carry any merit? Is that possible? Is that attack a realistic thing, or was that blown out of the water?
I think it is possible, but I don't think if you look at Supermicro's motherboards in question that they were a victim. I've spoken with a number of companies who were kind of close to this particular story, and nothing really ever was proven that it did indeed happen. But it's very feasible to get involved into the supply chain and put these types of things in there. Now, if you're going to tamper with the supply chain, it's not going to affect just one or a handful of customers. It's going to affect everybody who buys that particular make and model of that particular motherboard. So for somebody to come out and say, yeah, the supply chain was tampered with and only the motherboards going to Apple or only the motherboards going to AWS were the ones that had the implant, that's going to require a lot of coordination and logistics and moving parts and cooperation with many, many parties. So to say that was targeted at specific end users, I'd say that's kind of a tough sell, but it's not as tough if it's going to impact the entire model line.
All right. And you mentioned that most of your customers are U.S. companies getting you to basically validate firmware from foreign countries. Have you had any traction in foreign countries as well? Like, are European companies coming to you, or is it?
Yes. In fact, it's ironic you bring that up because one of our foreign telco customers, Altibox, is out of Norway, and they have been they've been engaged with us on a service level contract, so they will send us specific devices, and we will evaluate those devices, and then for a price, we'll actually write up a detailed a vulnerability report, what we found with remediation steps, and then they use that information to go back and push back on their vendors. We're in the process now that they've seen the value over the course of like 5 different evaluations we've done on 5 different products, that we're trying to get them to become a subscriber to the platform, and they can start doing a lot of this analysis on themselves. We've also been asked to spend some time with Aon, believe it or not, an insurance company headquartered over in London. I spent 2 weeks there helping them develop a new cyber insurance policy for some of their customers that would leverage our platform, probably for product liability purposes. So when a customer were to get a product liability policy, that product connects to the internet, they need to have a cyber component to it. And to help that underwriting process, they'd like to use our platform to see what existing problems are already there before they agree to underwrite product liability for that type of device.
Yeah, definitely mitigate their risk there.
Yeah, exactly. Risk mitigation. That's exactly what it's about.
Yeah. All right. So if people want to find out some more about you guys, I know I mentioned you have some resources and blogs and things. Where's the best place for them to go? To your website?
Best place to go is the website, www.refirmlabs.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, Refirm Labs.
All right, we'll definitely check that out. And I know I was actually looking back while we were talking because it was starting to ring some bells, and I remember we actually spoke with you at RSA back in 2018. So it's kind of cool to see kind of full circle here and where you guys have come since then. So hopefully you won't be a stranger. We can talk to you sometime next year and see how that's all going and with the insurance stuff and
find out how it went when you got acquired by Cisco.
Yeah. Where blockchain took over the company and see what you guys are up to now. Yeah.
Great.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. And thank you, all of you, for watching. But stay tuned. We've got more coming up on Technado right after this.
I'm James Packer. I'm the General Manager of Kirk ISS based in the Cayman Islands. I used ITProTV extensively in my last place. It grew very well, helped upskill the team. I had 110 engineers in the field and we had dozens of IT Pro accounts with the guys training, and last year alone they passed over 40 certs by using the online training. I think I can safely say without ITProTV I wouldn't be where I was today because I only got this job on the back of the qualifications I have.
All right, thank you so much to Terry for joining us and taking time out of his day for the second time to speak to us, actually. And that was a really cool story about the cameras and how they were able to track that stuff.
You always hear about the risk of IoT, and I always worry about them just being coded really crappy and attackers can get into it. But what he was showing us was it could be the companies themselves that are putting these weaknesses in for their governments or whatever, and that's stuff that you may have no idea about, and it's good to know that at least somebody out there is looking for it.
Yeah, find out who owns the companies. And if it's the Chinese government, look twice. All right, well, we wanted to let you know before we let you go about a couple things over here at ITProTV. First of all, a couple of great webinars. We just had one actually today, Landing Your Dream IT Job Using LinkedIn. That's going to show up in our archive very soon over at itpro.tv/webinars, but you can also sign up for the upcoming webinars, like one with Mike Rodrick, this guy right next to me, on Microsoft Certification Test Prep. There's a lot of changes going on with the role-based stuff with Microsoft Certs now, and he and Cherokee are going to walk you through that on Thursday, April 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Also have 10 tips for leading effective IT teams coming up later in April. So a lot of good stuff over there at itpro.tv/webinars. You can see all the past ones as well and sign up for those and get the recordings. Also want to let you know about a special offer. We've got amazing new pricing, but we also can give you even better pricing than that with a promo code for 30% off. If you head over to go.itpro.tv/Technado, that discount will be for the lifetime of your subscription. And if you've got a business and want to find out about special business pricing and business plans, you can request a demo there as well. That's go.itpro.tv/Technado. Well, thank you guys both for joining us today. And I know, I've got that initial crap cert, but I'm going to go out and see what other crap I can get into and expand my IT knowledge and make myself more hireable.
It's important, and it is a well sought after skill. Stick that on your resume. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to keep it fresh with the crap. I try to once a morning or so, I'll get up and I'll I can't even keep a straight face. All right, well. Enjoy that. That's at ITPro.tv/crap-cert, I said. Yeah. So print out your own, put it up in your cubicle, and have some fun with that. So thanks, guys, for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week right here on Technado.